You are listening to Spotlight Sessions with Justin Bamforth. The program provides an inside look at the creative field through exclusive conversations with industry professionals. Every episode is recorded live each month in the Adobe Creative Career Discord. Check out the show links to learn more and join for free. This episode was previously recorded before a live listening audience. Tonight's guest is Chelsie Tamms, a Chicago-based artist, educator, and entrepreneur who has built a thriving, values-driven business by doing something many creatives struggle with, designing a career that actually works for her life. You see, Chelsie is the founder of Lettering Works, a studio she launched in 2016 that blends hand lettering, branding, education, and wholesale products, all rooted in community, intention, and creativity. Her work spans these custom brand packages, artist courses, books, merchandise, and deeply personal passion projects, including Cool Beans, a powerful initiative raising awareness around kidney disease. But what makes Chelsie's story especially compelling is her transparency. She doesn't shy away from the real side of entrepreneurship and the way chronic illness has shaped how she works to define success on her own terms. So in this conversation, we're going to dig into freelancing versus business ownership, building multiple income streams, navigating wholesale, and how to grow a creative business without burning yourself out trying to follow someone else's blueprint. So if you've ever wondered how to build a creative career that's sustainable, flexible, and genuinely aligned with who you are, well, this episode is for you. So Chelsie Tamms, welcome to Spotlight Sessions.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Justin. Excited to be here and have this conversation.
Yeah, and look, for anyone hearing about you for the first time, how do you usually describe what you do? Because you do a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Happy to share. So, I really identify as a lettering artist and brand designer. I started my studio almost 10 years ago and have kept it intentionally a solo one woman show. And most of what I do spans kind of all under this umbrella of lettering, but spans into wholesale and branding and custom design and illustration, some consulting. I've built courses out. So, all of it does seem like a lot when you hear it all at once, but I really see it as finding a creative way to do what I love most and finding different avenues to bring that to life and be able to work with people and use those skill sets and apply them in ways that really connect and offer me a fulfilling career, but also offer me a chance to have an impact with my work.
Now, you jumped into freelancing right out of college, correct?
Yes, I did.
What led you to make that decision at the time?
Yeah, so I was actually really fortunate in that my school, I studied graphic design and Spanish, as well as got a minor in marketing, but my school had an entrepreneurship program. And based on me already studying other things, I did not have time to get a major or minor in that, but I was plugged into some of the opportunities available for entrepreneurs and students in general. And I actually won $10,000 to start my own business. So that really helped make the decision and make it a lot easier to just say yes to testing out freelancing right out of college. So I was able to kind of bypass the corporate world. I had already had some internships. I knew what I loved doing, but it gave me this runway, this $10,000 to really just figure things out and not have to worry about if it worked out perfectly. Because as I'm sure a lot of people have learned or are experiencing, depending on where you're at in your career, you can always find a job and you can always kind of find your way back into different careers and opportunities, but taking a chance on yourself and trying your own path is something that can be scary to do. So having this runway and this startup funding really made that decision and helped me jump right into freelancing right out of college.
Yeah, I'd say that was a very amazing little stepping stone, to kind of get you over that hurdle because a lot of people they're afraid to just make that bold leap. But for you, I guess you had that extra incentive to do it. So there's no excuses at that point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's maybe a lesson to take from it too, is as much as you can freelance and start with absolutely nothing, and you might be in a position that that makes sense, you need to have some type of a runway or support system, whatever that looks like for you. So for me, that looked like having some startup funding because it would be really hard to start your business from a place of, I need to make money as soon as possible. So I had a little bit of a buffer, and I think that made all the difference.
Is it possible though to start up with essentially nothing, or do you have to have at least something?
I think it depends on the person. It depends on what motivates you, what stresses you out, your tolerance for risk and your tolerance for like chasing different rewards, making things happen, how willing you are to like put in the work and what that looks like, what your unique situation, your health, all of these things look like that plays into that answer. So it's going to be really a case by case basis. But for me, what it looked like was I really needed a laptop, access to the Adobe Creative Suite, and just my excitement to start meeting clients, figuring things out. So it can be as simple as that, having some type of access to whatever programs you use or whatever skills you need. And then it's really building from that. So that being said, I think it's also very valuable to have some sort of runway, whether that is you don't have to worry about paying rent. So, what it looked like for me was I lived in central Illinois and rent was a lot cheaper than it is here in Chicago. So, I personally also saved up enough money to pay rent for 1 year. And that really took off a lot of that pressure, right? The pressure that what if I can't get the client, or do I need to say yes to things that aren't a good fit for me? So I think the more you can set yourself up to be in a position to say yes to what excites you and no to things that feel like they're kind of pulling you in the wrong direction, the better off you'll be. So is it possible to start with next to nothing? Absolutely. Are you going to be setting yourself up for better success if you're able to put some of these things in place to support you and encourage you and make your life less stressful? Of course, that's going to be better. So I think it just depends on your unique situation, what you need, what you have available to put into it, and what you need to get out of it.
Now, there does tend to be a difference, though, between freelancing and owning a small business. But how do you personally define that difference?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, especially for anyone who may just be starting out or wondering, like, how do I get to that point? For me, freelancing is really like thinking of yourself as an individual who is taking on all of these different projects. Whereas small business ownership means you're kind of seeing your business, your offerings, your services as an entity kind of separate from yourself. So I am a one person business owner and business. And that's great, but it is very different than freelancing because I think and operate from a small business perspective where I'm considering all the costs, not just thinking about that startup where I need my laptop and I need my creative programs from Adobe, but I really need to think about how am I going to invest in myself? How am I going to grow? What are different ways that I can engage with things? And it's really just a shift of like, thinking about what do I personally need? Do I want to make $50 an hour? Or what does my business need? Like, if my business is going to invest in software and tech and people and all these future things, I probably can't charge that same quote unquote lower rate because there's more cost to it. But I think it's a little bit bigger than just freelancing's cheaper, owning a small business is more expensive. I think it's really a mindset shift and it's how you structure your work and how you think about your impact too. When you have a small business, a lot of times I feel like people lean more towards creating a process and a way of working and a philosophy. And it's a little bit bigger than taking on a freelance project where maybe the client's directing you more. The more you establish your own studio or small business or whatever that looks like, the more you're kind of creating your own brand and your own identity that kind of supersedes yourself.
What aspects of running a business surprised you the most once things really started to grow and happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest things that's surprising is just realizing how much business happens with business. Like freelancing can sometimes be great and is a good fit for people when they just want to do the design work. And maybe they don't make quite as much money, or they're working with somebody else who's kind of handling the business side of things, whether that's you working with an agent or it's you contracting with agencies or however you make it work. That's a bit different than owning your own business and realizing, oh, you're in charge of it all. You have to find the clients, you have to set up the process, you have to take the payments, you have to do all of the things, and you have to envision what the future looks like. So I think there's just that big distinction between the two of how you kind of frame your work, frame your opportunities, and what you kind of take advantage of in your position. And some of it just comes down to how much do you believe you can take on and how much do you like feel confident in yourself and your abilities. And sometimes being able to have an entity behind you can help build that confidence.
And it's just you, right? I mean, you don't have any employees or anything like that?
Yeah, that's correct. And I feel like that's been a really intentional decision, partially around just chronic health needs and just wanting to build a business that supports me. And I think that's where sometimes people get a little off track. But the ideal for me is figuring out, okay, what do I want personally in my life? And how do I build a business that supports that? So we're not working just to work or working to live, but we're really living and doing all of that and figuring out how does our business, whatever we're creating, support the lifestyle that we want. And sometimes that means having employees. Other times in my situation, it means it's intentionally just me because I can take on the right kind of projects for what I envision, what I enjoy, and I can build that business and that life that suits my unique needs.
As a small business, what are some of the things you've consciously opted out of?
Ooh, I love this question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is in kind of the wholesale realm, right? So I said that was part of my business, and it's been a pretty big portion of my business the past couple years. I would say around 70% of my gross revenue has come from wholesale. Wholesale is notorious for people saying, go to trade shows, go to pop up events, do all these markets, all of these things. That's a great way you can grow your B2C business with products as well as your wholesale business. And that's a really big thing that I've opted out of, mostly once again for health reasons. But I don't participate in a lot of in person markets. And I think conjoined with this whole idea of wholesale, I've kind of opted out of doing as much direct to consumer selling. And that makes sense for me because wholesale feels a little bit more scalable. It's easier for me to work from home, to work from bed, to package things on a schedule that works for me. Whereas working directly with people that are buying a single sticker or a single postcard or a single enamel pin that I've created, that creates me a different set of needs for a day-to-day basis on what I'm having to do and be in charge of. And it's just not as aligned with my goals and what I need from my business. So that's one thing that I've definitely opted out of. And I would say next year's coming up on 10 years in business, which I'm really excited about. And it's really gotten me to start thinking about like how I've opted out or how I'm continuing to opt out of advice that doesn't serve me and things that just don't really align with the vision that I want. And that's something, while I wish I would have learned it earlier, I think we all have to go through our own unique process of, taking in information, figuring out the hard way sometimes what advice doesn't really serve us. So moving forward, I like to think of how I can take in as much as possible, but then filter it through my own lens of what I need, what I want, what I'm interested in. And I think everyone else should do that as well. It just looks a little different depending on the stage of business that you're in.
Now, you mentioned this term wholesale. To those who aren't familiar with wholesale, what exactly is this?
Yeah. So wholesale is essentially where I sell my products to a real retailer and they sell it directly to the consumers. So they're essentially a middleman, if you want to think of it that way. I'm selling it to this place that is now vending it to a larger audience. There's pros and cons of this, there's pros and cons of everything. But I think one pro of wholesale, if you're an individual business owner, is you don't have to handle managing a storefront. You don't have to manage employees or selling things, having a physical brick and mortar space. These are all things that they can handle. The cons of it is you make a lot less money. Not necessarily overall, but just per item. So, typical rates for paper goods, for example, are a 50-50 split with wholesale, especially in big cities like Chicago. And when you're selling on platforms like Fair, which is a platform that's essentially like the Etsy for wholesale. And these are all things to consider when you're thinking about, is this the right option for me? You definitely need some of like a larger catalog of different products because you can't often just sell one individual thing. Some businesses do, so it once again it varies by person and different needs and different offerings and all of those good things. But at the same time, it's just going to be a different structure for business. So I like to think of it as an opportunity to work with people that can really help grow my reach and impact, and they're taking over a chunk of that work. So I really focus on creating the designs, creating the products, and getting them into the hands of people that buy them essentially in bulk and get this 50% discount so that they're able to sell them to larger audiences that I might be able to not necessarily reach on my own.
You're involved with all of these multiple income streams. Obviously, wholesale, we talked about it, but you do books, you do branding, you do education. And then I guess you work directly with clients if they approach you and they say, hey, we need this designed. In the very, very beginning, how did you find your first client?
Yeah, I love this question. So for me, once again, naming the context of having some startup funding that gave me kind of this extra flexibility, I had a little bit more time to kind of figure out my style and interests as an artist. So the way I got my very first clients, one was pitching myself essentially in the context of the student entrepreneurship competition that I won. So the judges were some of the first inquiries that I ever got. And so I think in short, that is to say, communicating to people, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm offering, is how you get your first client. And what that looked like for me was presenting my business and my business concept to different judges in different competitions, things that were happening on campus. So those were the ways that I got those first clients. But I think a better answer to this question is more of like, how did I intentionally get that first client? Maybe you're not participating in a student entrepreneurship competition, so how could you start to get your first client just tomorrow? And I would say the first step for that, what it's looked like for me in the past, is creating passion projects and creating the work that I want to see in the world, building out projects that you can actually feel and see and send to the right people so they get the ideas and get to a sense for what you're looking to do, how you could help them. And so some of the early passion projects that I did were around making postcards for Peoria, and I was able to get those in the hands of the right people, and they really kind of started snowballing. And that specific project was just from once again communicating to people this is actually what I love doing and what I'm looking to do. And kind of the precursor to the postcards was actually a book that I created when I was a student called Just My Type of Lettering. And this book was actually created as part of a English course that I kind of had this whole other proposal that was very much centered on how do we combine graphic design and Spanish and marketing all in one. And it was going to be a research paper. I had a whole proposal for it. I scrapped the idea and then moved towards this idea for a book. And long story short, I created all the written portion in this class over my winter break. I created all of the visuals. The next semester, I funded it through Kickstarter. And that really played into showing a visual to those judges. And I think that that goes back to say that was one of my earlier passion projects. I'd done a couple before that and I featured them in the book, and that was really the way that I could show people, show the judges, show the next people I came across what it is that I could do, love to do, want to do more of. And that's what really landed those clients. So I think the short answer of all of that is how do you communicate your passion? How do you show it? Especially if you're a visual artist or a designer, how do we show instead of just tell?
And on that note about the Just My Type of Lettering book, I see that it's sold out on your site. But is there another place that people can get it?
Honestly, I only have a couple copies left, so I probably could update my website to reflect the few copies that I have left. But it really was like part of the earlier chapter of my business. So I don't necessarily at this point plan on doing a reprint of it, but it's been just such a great tool in getting business and sharing my love of lettering. So yeah, only a few copies are left in print.
Well, there you go, audience. So sorry to hear that, but good news, 100 Days of Peoria, that book is in stock. Check it out. All this and more if you go to letteringworks.com and click on shop at the top there. Speaking of the book, Ashna Mali in the chat asked, how did you get the word out about the book so that potential clients did see your work? Was it through websites or social media?
Yeah, great question. I mostly got the word out through social media when I first started, so I'll speak to both books. So, just my type of lettering was created when I was a student, and I really used the Kickstarter as a campaign and way to kind of have some content to talk about. So, I mostly just shared it on my Facebook page and Instagram page, and this was back in about 2016, like early 2016 is when this started kind of coming together. And I also entered it into some local advertising competitions where it won Best in Show and like a Judge's Choice Award, I believe, and a Gold Award. Like it got all this recognition, so that really helped. So I think in short, it's getting it out there, it's showing it to people, and a lot of times social media is a very easy way of kind of blasting it out there. That was nearly 10 years ago. So now it might look a little bit different. How I would do things differently now is I might try to send specific PDF or something that I've created to contacts that I have via email or other platforms. But what I did back with the 100 Days of Peoria book is I actually had an Instagram account. So the whole project with the premise of it was a daily drawing. So I shared a new drawing each day for 100 days. And then there were a couple extra additions to that as well, but that was really the premise, was like building this passion project. And then Kickstarter actually just came out with a campaign at the time that was about like projects of Earth, or it was something that was talking about a snapshot of time. And I realized the newer project that I was doing would actually make kind of a fun coffee table book. So that's how I turned that one into a book. So I already had kind of the audience I had built on Instagram, which wasn't a huge audience, but it was very like niche and specific to Peoria. And then it was just a matter of like telling the right people about it. So I actually did that book partially through an artist who had a Prairie Center of the Arts in Peoria, Illinois. It's no longer open as a studio, but I had a residency there for 6 months and then got to show my work, which was really cool. And so I used kind of that experience and the people I met through that to let them know about the book and encourage them to share it with other people. And all of the businesses and things that I featured in the book, I reached out to them and invited them to the show, let them know they'd be in the book, all of these things. So if there's ways you can think of when you have a book or something to share, how do you connect it to certain people and make sure they are aware that it exists? So that's why I say that it's a little different now compared to in the past, because I have a much clearer idea of who I would like to see some of my work. So instead of posting on social media and crossing my that that person sees it, I try to find a different way that I can actually get it into their hands or on their desk or in front of them at least so they can notice it. And I feel like more and more social media isn't quite as reliable at getting in front of those exact people you want. So it's great for when you just want to put work out there and see what sticks. But if you have a specific person that you hope sees it, I would encourage you to think of other ways that you can kind of get it in front of them.
Now, you mentioned earlier about passion projects, and I want to cover one particular passion project. It's called Cool Beans. What is this?
Yeah, so this was probably the passion project that I put the most into over my near 10 years in business. And Cool Beans was a fictional concept around a renal diet in a restaurant. So, how did I get to that idea? Well, first, I've always had a family history of kidney disease. I personally have polycystic kidney disease. My dad has had two transplants, and my grandma had a transplant. Uncles, lots of family members have had transplants. So, kidney disease is very close to me personally, my experience. And I was very frustrated at the end of 2019 when I was officially diagnosed with it, because I had this like frustrating moment. And if anyone's ever been diagnosed with something or learn about a new condition you have or that you might have, and you're trying to figure out what to do, of course, try to figure out now that I have this and it's officially diagnosed, what do I have to change? And the Google results are not very positive. It's like eat boiled chicken and plain white rice. And that was not very exciting to me. So I tried to come up with a project around how can I research more and make just part of my already existing design process. Like I do all the time, projects, but I'm not enjoying doing research on the personal health side of things. And then I also asked myself, well, what do I want to do more of creatively? And at the time, I was like, it would be really cool to work with more restaurants, local businesses. So, what if I kind of merge those ideas? So, this was a food truck concept or a restaurant concept with all sorts of deliverables that would kind of mirror what I wanted to create more of as a designer. So, things that it included was a full menu, graphics, a logo, color scheme, lots and lots of mock-ups to just have fun with envisioning it as if it were real. And then what was really cool about this project is I was able to create a simple PDF that really highlighted the breadth of all the work that I put together. And I reached out directly to a couple kidney organizations, specifically in Illinois and Chicago, and showed them the work. And long story short, it led to a lot of really cool opportunities and getting to work more in the kidney space. And I wasn't 100% sure exactly what I wanted to come out of it when I created it, if I wanted to do more just in restaurants or if I wanted to do more in kind of kidney disease and health advocacy. But it really landed me some cool opportunities on the kidney and health side of things.
One of the questions that I was wondering is, how do you balance this purpose driven work with the financial realities of running a business? But sometimes these passion projects will lead to business. So it's pretty inspiring.
Yeah, I think it's a hard balance, right? Like if we knew exactly how to do it, then we would all do it. But I think of kind of the 80-20 rule in that like 80% of our efforts might lead to 20% of our results or vice versa. Like there's just so many patterns that we can kind of see. Like 20% of our clients might lead to 80% of our revenue. And if we could easily just figure that out, then we would just do that 20%, right? But I think what's important about passion projects is saying, like, what if I go all in on this idea and a big imp? And so I think it's really key to find a balance and make time and think about kind of how things shake up, like the 80-20 rule, and figure out maybe I spend 80% of my time on client work and 20% of my time on passion projects, but just figuring out a breakdown that's sustainable and recognizing that passion projects, if you choose that as a way to generate business, is a cost of doing business. It's something that deserves your time and attention. And it's that you really have to treat the same as you would treat any given client project if you want to use it as a tool and a strategy. If you want to just do it for fun, that might look differently for you. And that's okay. But it's really figuring out like, how do you want to use them? How much do you want to leverage them? How much are you willing to kind of risk in pouring your time and effort into it? Because there's no guarantee that you'll get work out of it, but there is a hope that you will if you really showcase, once again, that passion, that excitement, your skill sets in a way that people can understand. And then that's when you can get better aligned projects. If nothing else, I think you can get these projects that are just such a perfect fit for you. Like there were times early on that I didn't think you could really choose the type of work that you were doing. Like for me, lettering is somewhat niche already. So I just thought any project that requires lettering, I have to take it because I can't also have content that I would like to do. But being able to create passion projects and share them with the world, I find that they actually enable us to really get closer to that ideal, right? What if we could work on the specific skills and tech and tools and all the things that we love, and the content's great and the impact's great. So while it's not realistic for that to be 100% of business, you can start small and just keep trying to work and build up. And then hopefully at some point you reach this where you can more time to those passion projects. So for me, it looks like balancing what is profitable with what is filled with passion and trying to continuously kind of tip that scale so that it's either more passion or more passion and profit.
And my show producer, Catherine Chu, in the audience says, "This is so inspiring. The best ideas are born from personal experience." And speaking of personal experience and personal challenges, you mentioned the kidney disease, but that's not the only challenge you've had to work through, has it?
Unfortunately, no. I definitely have a handful of different health ailments, so to speak. One of the bigger ones was scoliosis. I had a spinal fusion surgery when I was in eighth grade. So I have screws and bars down my back. And I feel like that really impacted deciding to take the creative path and also to a level deciding to work for myself because so many times I've gotten advice as well as like freelancers out there, but like, oh, you can always pick up a job at a coffee shop or something else, and some of those jobs aren't a great fit for me because of their requirements of standing for long periods of time or lifting 25 to 50 pound packages and just all these things that kind of make be who I am, but also not the best fit for certain opportunities. So I think it's definitely played a huge role in how I've gotten here and what I choose to engage in and what I choose to opt out of as well.
What's something people often misunderstand about living with chronic illness while running a business?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I think maybe some of the things that are misunderstood is just the ways that like energy kind of ebbs and flows and like needing certain accommodations. I think that's what's tricky about working in the corporate world. If you require accommodations that might be uncomfortable to ask for or just impractical in the traditional 9 to 5 corporate office setting, it can be really hard to like advocate for yourself, to ask for days off to go to doctor's appointments. But the really cool thing about working for yourself with chronic illness is just being able to adapt and do what you need to do. So whether that's working from bed in the morning or afternoon or evening, like that's fair, everything's fair game. And scheduling your appointments first and then figuring out how to fit business in around that. I think that can be a really empowering thing. But another thing that's really tough and I don't have the answers to. I would love if somebody does, but it's just managing healthcare. In America, it is so expensive, and so having to kind of account for and budget for, just high premiums and high cost of access to care can be a huge barrier from being able to run your own business. So that goes back to kind of that runway that we were talking about earlier and why it's really important to have that or have something because it is really hard to have more expensive needs potentially and like have more pressure on yourself as an individual business that you're generating all the revenue for is also responsible for providing you healthcare.
For many creatives, myself included, we tend to measure our success by what we accomplish in a day, regardless of how much we actually do accomplish. I kind of feel guilty about taking a quote unquote day off. How do you handle this guilt, especially on days when your capacity might be limited?
Yeah, this is such a good question, and it's honestly hard, right? We all, especially people that are very like motivated and passionate, and we love designing and want to do it forever. All these things are great. And like, how do we rest and how do we celebrate our wins and how do we slow down when we want to and when we really need to? I think in short, there's always going to be some guilt that you kind of have to deal with and manage. But for me, it's really breaking things down into manageable tasks and also taking time to like celebrate all of your wins. So I have a really defined process now where I journal every single morning, write down some things I'm grateful for, really try to put together that to-do list, take a minute to look at that to-do list and say, this is way too many things. I need to pare it down. There's so many books out there that recommend like no more than 3 things on your to-do list. So that can be kind of a big thing to kind of navigate on its own. But a lot of times when I feel that to-do list is like not really possible to accomplish, I try to break things down into more manageable tasks. And then I'm able to go back to that journal. At the end of the day, I do a little reflection and I write what I'm most proud of and excited about business wise and personally and what I accomplished and got done. And it's okay if some of those to-do list items are smaller. When you break them down, you can see that you're still making progress in the right direction. And for me, that's really key because I don't want to go the other direction and like lose progress. But even if I take the smallest baby step in the right direction, I think that's still a win and worth celebrating. And sometimes something on that to do list could be as simple as take a rest for an afternoon. Like that is productive and that it's building future capacity and helping you move forward. So that's something that I enjoy doing, that journaling process. But the bigger part of it is that at the end of every week, I journal all of my wins and highlight the ones. I just do it in my notes app. I bold the ones that are like bigger wins. That filters a monthly update that I have on my blog, on my website. So if you're curious as to kind of what I do on a month to month basis, you can go to letteringworks.com/blog and look for any of the small business journals that I've put on there. And I've actually, this month will mark 5 full years of this practice. And I think that's been really key to kind of eliminating some of the guilt because when you rec how much you're doing, even if they're small things, even if it's just getting up and showering and taking care of yourself or making a nutritious meal or sketching an idea, and that's all you got to, you'll see over time that that really adds up to something that is really impressive. And we should take the time to be proud of it.
Creatives tend to get this reputation for it, is being a night owl, right? Staying up all night. And I know not every creative is like that, but a huge majority tend to be. It tends to be a bad habit. I'm speaking about myself. But if you're trying to like break out of that cycle, okay, and you're trying to get into more of a routine, how do you maintain that routine and that schedule?
Ooh, such a good question. I would say the first thing is just certain people are cut out to work as freelancers or work for themselves, and other people are not. So I think one requirement is that you're willing to put in the work. If like you might be somebody that needs a boss or somebody to really hold you accountable. So the skill to hone first is just making sure that you're committed to whatever it is that you want to accomplish. I would also recommend measuring inputs instead of outputs because you can't always control the outputs. So and managing what you can control and what you can put really key. But in addition to all of figuring out what rules are you willing to throw away? Like if you want to work as a night owl, that's totally fine with me. I've worked with lots of like clients and mentored designers, and like if that's how you work best, I support it. But where are you getting your fun time and personal time and rest and relaxation in? So one tip that I have is really to schedule your personal time first and get clear on what matters to you personally, put that into your calendar, and then build your business around it. So, the same idea of building your business around your life, not building your life around your business, because we do get stuck in this 9 to 5. And I definitely did that getting started. I'm like, it's 9 to 5. I need to be working. And the further along I got in business, the more I realized some days you just don't have things to work on, or the things you do have to work on just aren't working out. You'd be much better taking a nap or a walk or doing something totally off your to-do list and really focusing on that and coming back to the thing when you can actually focus and do a good job of it. So with that being said, I think scheduling those personal things first really encourages a routine to be built around them and really encourages us to figure out, how do I get the important stuff done? How do I be decisive? And maybe the best example I can give of this is if you think of yourself right before a vacation, you become a lot more discerning on, this needs to get done right now, this is good enough, this is how I can make it happen. Versus if you have all of the time in the world, you can fall into the trap of, I'm going to take all of the time ever to do this. And that's where things can get unprofitable in your business if you allow yourself 6 days to do a task that really should have taken one day. And so that's why I think putting your personal calendar kind of in there first creates these blockers and these hurdles. And I find that to be great to build my schedule out and routines because it's a challenge for me. I need to accomplish more so I can go enjoy the personal things. And I respect those personal calendar requests, items, deadlines, to dos, all of those things just as importantly as my business tasks. And that helps me really achieve some semblance of balance. Of course, to a lot of us, work life balance is just such an abstract, hard to accomplish thing. But for me, putting those personal things in first helps me know that I do have some balance in there.
To learn more about tonight's guest, Chelsie Tamms, you can check out her website and socials, which I've posted in the chat, or for those of you listening on demand, in the show notes. And if we didn't get a chance to cover your questions, feel free to reach out to Chelsie directly at either her website at letteringworks.com, on Instagram at letteringworks, or on LinkedIn. Now, if you are new to the Adobe Creative Career Discord, I'd like to take a moment to share one of the coolest things we're working on right now, and that would be the Adobe Creative Apprenticeship Program. This program connects aspiring creative people like you with top creative companies providing the actual training and experience that you need, which also looks amazing on a resume. Think of it like the ultimate internship meets mentorship opportunity. But wait, that's not all. You see, there is another aspect to the program, and it's called commissioned projects. This is where you can get even more experience working on an actual paid project with Adobe. Yes, that's right, Adobe as your first client. Seriously. The details on the Creative Apprenticeship Program, the commissioned projects, and more incredible career resources can all be found at behance.net/resources. That's behance.net/resources. All right, Chelsea, I got to ask you this. Since you have a wealth of information, what's the worst piece of business advice you've ever received?
Oh, it's hard to put my finger on a single piece of advice. I have to think about that. I feel like there's so much bad advice out there. But really, I think the ones that pop into my head first are just like people that say you have to insert whatever thing that they think is best for you here. And like that's definitely when we think of like red flags as like clients and like designers who are looking out for those things. When people say you have to, it really feels like not aligned for me. And I think that's because there's so many ways to do things correctly and there's so many ways to do things incorrectly, but there's so much context that also gets missed, especially if you're living with chronic illness and invisible illnesses. And there's people that will just give you advice like, if I were you, I would do this. And it can be hard to like that out sometimes, especially early on in business, because it's just such a, you know, they must know more than me, or maybe they know something I don't. And like that's where our kind of imposter syndrome kicks in and creeps in to kind of make us second guess ourselves. So I guess on one hand, just any time that people are saying things like that. The other thing that I feel like has been the worst advice for me, particularly, is like you need to scale your business. You need to hire people because if it's just you, then you have a lifestyle business or you've created a job for yourself. And that's not a business, that's a job. Like if you go on vacation and you're not making money, you have a job, not a business. And I've really moved away from that concept and found a way to like intentionally make a lifestyle business, as we talked about, building your business around your life and kind of reclaiming that term. It doesn't mean that you're not successful, it doesn't mean that you're limited, it just means that you're doing things differently. And I think that advice that I got early on kind of scared me into thinking, oh, I have to hire people. And at one point, I hired a bookkeeper, and it just wasn't the right decision for my business. And I think it came from that advice that just wasn't well suited to me. And so I'm sure all of you will get advice at some point, and I just encourage you to check in with yourself and say, does that make sense for me? Do they not know something about me, my interests, my goals that actually makes this bad advice for me? And knowing when to kind of take it or leave it. And I encourage you to think, if you're listening to this, think about that with everything I'm saying too. It's not going to apply to every single person. Your situation might be very unique or very different. So everything that's worked for me and has supported my business isn't going to work for you. So you have to figure out how to translate that advice into making it something that you can actually benefit from.
So we also see this in the creative field. These templates that come out, these formulas, especially Instagram. You see one person post something in a certain style, and it seems like everyone copies that style. And you're just scrolling through a feed of everyone doing the same rinse and repeat cycle, the same copy and paste. How do you decide what's right for your career? Not necessarily from a design standpoint, but from a career standpoint, from a business standpoint. How do you determine what's right for you versus what's just popular or working for someone else?
Yeah, such a good question. Thanks, Justin. I would say getting clear on your values personally and your business values. So, depending on if your business feels like kind of a separate entity from you, or if you feel kind of one and the same, that could determine if you need a separate set of values for yourself versus your business, or like what overlaps. That's going to vary by person. But I think using those as a guide and really seeing, does this trend or this thing that I'm seeing make sense for me to be a part of and contribute to? Or does it feel like something that I'm just jumping on, maybe for popularity or money, or I kind of hate that I'm doing this? And I can think of one example that happened this year that is really different to me, or I would this way. Like back in the beginning of my business, I might see a trend and try to jump on it as soon as possible and create something quickly. And now I have a much more thoughtful and slow approach, honestly. So the example I'm thinking of is when it was announced that we got a Chicago Pope, and definitely a big thing for us here in Chicago, a lot of pride around that. There's this like immense pressure. I remember I was had a meeting at the Field Museum, and I was meeting over lunch, and the person I was meeting with was like, sorry to interrupt our conversation, but my phone is blowing up. Like, we just got a Chicago Pope. And then we went back to our meeting, and I remember getting on the bus and being like, I think I have to go home and make a design. And so I had a kind of long bus ride to think about, like, how am I going to respond to this? And I realized in that bus ride, no, I am no longer jumping on trends just to jump on trends, be as quick as possible, derail my day. I don't want this chaos. And so I just sat with that. I think it was like a Thursday. And then, of course, because we're all creative people, I was thinking through, well, if I did do that, what would it look like? And I kind of envisioned how I would create the design. And by the time I got home, I was like, okay, if I did it, I know how I would do it. But I'm not going to do it because I have other things I want to focus on. And I don't want to be like responsive this way, like jumping on a trend. So I took a little break, went back to all the things I had to do. And then a couple days pass. It's the weekend. I've not been working on weekends for the vast majority of this year. I only really work on weekends if I'm kind of displacing something from like either a personal event or a doctor's appointment where I just have a little I have to get done. So, long story short, it's Tuesday, and I was like, you know what? I actually do want to make this design. It's been a couple days. I get to make the rules. I get to change my mind. So I created a Chicago Pope design and then gave myself that morning to work on it, shared it. So I was still kind of on board with the trend, a little late, but it has ended up being one of my best sellers wholesale wise. And so I think the lesson I learned from that is it's okay, like you don't have to jump on the trend. It's okay if you take your time with it. And if it's meant for you, it'll work out. And it also would have been fine. I got to a point on that Tuesday that if I make this and there's zero traction, that's okay. I'm not doing it for the trend. I'm doing it because I have this idea now and I want to get this idea out. And it did work out in a way that worked for me. And some of the things that I maybe missed, both positive and negative, one, blowing up and getting lots of news coverage, that did not happen to me. So that's a con, so to speak. But a pro is that the design, at least to my knowledge, hasn't been stolen and just copied over and over like some of the initial ones that were created. The copyright infringement and just how many people were selling, some of the people that started the trend or got it out first, was just, that's so much more stress than I wanted to handle. I think there's pros and cons. Again, I also learned is thinking through, I don't need the pressure to do this trend immediately. But then after a couple days, I was like, wait, this is actually very on brand, aligned with my values to create something around Chicago pride. It wasn't about fastest. It was about sitting with it and thinking, how can I contribute in a way that's unique to my business and my voice, and giving yourself the time and space to actually create what you want to create, not get swept up in the trend so much that you're just making something to try to be fast and be participating in it, but sitting with that and thinking, how can I do it my way?
Let's get into some of your educational stuff and specifically your courses. Tell me about some of these.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started building out courses in the pandemic. And I think the reason was I just hit this point 5 years in we're starting all of the same questions. Lots of questions around how do you do this as a business owner? I want to follow in your footsteps. What does that look like? Can you give me all your tips? Can you tell me how to do this? It seems like you know how to do this. And one defining moment for me meeting up, I had a few years, maybe 6 years prior or so. So I had him as a mentor before I started a business, before I knew I was going to start a business. I was still a student. And fast forward to when we met just to catch up, now that I had moved to Chicago, and he started asking me questions. And I was like, just shaken. Like, you are my mentor. You can't ask me questions. You know everything. I know nothing. And I think that's just a good reminder if you are participating in the mentor program through Adobe, that like you do know unique and cool things too. And that's true from the beginning. It just took me many years passing and him asking these specific questions where I was like, wait, you don't know this? I learned this, but you didn't. And it wasn't in like a competitive sense. It was in a, oh, we took different paths. Like he worked in the advertising agencies and has all of the insights and experience there. And I know more about business and freelancing and all of these things. So, all that to say, I once again work for myself. I cannot answer everyone's questions as they come in. It would be a full-time job and sadly unpaid. So I was able to take all of that information that I would love to sit down and tell every single person that asks, how do you run a business? How do you do all these things? And I packaged it up in a course so that I had an answer. When people came to me and said, hey, I want all of this information from you. Can I sit down to coffee and can you tell me everything? And instead of saying, no, I don't have time in my schedule, I'm able to point people to the courses and say all of the things that I would tell you, and honestly, way more, are packaged up in a course so you can get the information that I would tell you if we had infinite time and resources to share it. So it is really my solution to documenting all of the things that I've kind of learned through of owning my own business and being able to create them in a way that's more accessible and to anyone who's interested in learning.
Yeah, I'm on your website right now. It's at letteringworks.com/courses. You have a few on here. Are these like live courses? Or are they on-demand courses? Or how do these work?
Yeah, they're all on-demand courses. So they all have video lessons and PDFs with them that basically encourage people to go through different activities, learning information, and then applying it to you and your unique situation. So whether that's figuring out, okay, what are your unique offerings and what come at. And the goal too with the courses, because they're on demand, is that's kind of the first step. So people that want to work with me, if they are an artist or a small business owner who's kind of figuring these things out on their own, this is kind of like the DIY option. And then once you get through that, there's an option to work one on one with me, whether that's consulting or just figuring out how to apply all those things. And then you're off and you have more information than maybe if you were doing a bunch of Google searches or even trying to scrap together all different things you can find on AI. So the goal is really for it to be on demand, do it on your own timeline, take in all the information and talked about earlier, figure out what applies to you and kind of integrate that into what you're doing.
For somebody who may be listening to this broadcast right now, who might be doing freelancing on the side, but they're considering going full time, what should they focus on?
Number one, do not charge different rates. And what I mean by that is I see a lot of people a job, they're not feeling super fulfilled by their creative work. So they take on a super fun project for an unrealistic rate. Like they charge next to nothing to do this super cool branding project for a friend of a friend or whoever it is. And the real flaw in that is, yes, you can get a portfolio piece out of it. But if that's how you're building up your freelance business and you're hoping to kind of make the jump over, you're going to have to start over from scratch because all of the pricing, all of the systems you have in place are for a different category. They're not sustainable. They're prices that are assuming that you need no income from this. And you'll kind of hit reality, go full time, choose to do that, that you have to restructure everything because this isn't going to make you enough money for you full time. And so that's my biggest tip is just figure out how to price as if you are working for yourself now, and then the other thing that's really cool about that is maybe you don't need that income. You can save that income and then invest it into resources to help accelerate your success. So, what could those be? That could be investing in a course, investing in like a mentor or a coaching session or anything that you need to kind of answer some of the questions that you're getting stuck on. So, I would say that building that runway, it's the same as what we talked about earlier. So, as you're taking on these projects, you're able to build that like bank that you have to pull from. And then when you are able to build that up to have ideally 6 months of a runway for yourself, but maybe it's 1 month or 3 months. And this, once again, depends on your unique situation. If your job is toxic and you need to leave, you might tend to like focus on, oh, I should charge less for this. This will help my mental health. But at the same time, you have to figure out a way to make it a bit more sustainable for yourself and recognize that the more money you make, the more you can reinvest it, whether it's reinvesting into yourself and your own ideas or having an impact by being able to be generous and give it to different organizations you care about, contributing to causes, all of these things. So I think a lot of times we sell ourselves short, especially if we have a full source of income and we discount our services just in hopes of like, this is our way of giving back. So, one other tip I have there too is if you are discounting any work that you're doing, we don't have to get into if that's good or bad. Always document it because I've run into that issue, especially early on in business. I would do like a discount for something. I would not communicate that it was discounted. So that person would refer someone else or come back to me and they'd expect that rate. And it wasn't clear that they were getting a special first time customer discount or I'm trying this new service thing. So it's very easy to make those mistakes. And I would definitely encourage you to figure out a way that you can really support yourself, whatever it is that you need resource wise to make that happen and make sure that you're committing if you're discounting the sort of a reason that people actually know that. So they're not going to come back to you and expect a deal or expect something that's not something you plan to offer twice.
Especially in our server. A question that I see a lot, what should we charge for this particular project?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of resources out there. There's like the designer's handbook on pricing. So there's things out there you can search. My best tip if you're just starting out is do not reach out to somebody and say, "Hey, I got this project, what should I charge?" I get that question sometimes, and that's like a big I do not have time to sit down and do pricing. Pricing's always going to be a challenge. What you can do instead that's really helpful and might get you better results is reach out to somebody such as a mentor or a peer. Hey, here's the context, here's the project, here's the details. I'm thinking of charging this. Do you think that is appropriate? And so now you're going from asking somebody, please price this entire project for to do you think sounds fair? And that's more of a yes or no question. And they can adjust accordingly. They can say, oh yeah, that sounds fine. Or you know what, that sounds way too high or way too low. Have you considered this? So I think that's a much easier question to ask. And it's also a much easier question to answer. I guess it maybe isn't as easy to ask because you actually have to do the work, but I think that's the point is you should be the one kind of trying your best and see if you can check your work with somebody versus asking somebody else, can you do this for me?
Okay, so this question comes in from Professor Cannon. I did not forget about your question, sir. It's more of a design related question. How do you approach typography differently for each design you create to keep them fresh and not looking the same?
I would say a lot of it comes down to just taking different inspiration from the actual content of the project and seeing kind of what fits. And then with that, it's considering budget too. A lot of times I like to kind of dream big and think like, what is the most ideal solution from this? And then start to play with all those levers of how much budget do we have to work with? How much time do we have to work with? And some of those things kind of get us to an answer maybe even quicker than I would want to. Like maybe I want to do something a little bit more crazy and creative, but some of those restrictions kind of make some of those decisions for us. But I would say a lot of it comes down to thinking like what kind of style fits the values and the vibe and the energy and the intent and the goals of the project. And sometimes it comes down to this story thinking through what doesn't fit this project. And so it's really trying to come up with a couple solutions that feel really aligned because sometimes, as we talked about earlier, there's multiple correct solutions and there's multiple incorrect solutions. So it's really coming up with some solid, good ones that fit and feel really aligned. So the more I can, the more yes, that and embrace coming up with ideas that just feel like they touch on different parts of the business, whether it's a connection over here or something unique that ties into their mission or their history. Trying to pull from what exists already and creating something that like a natural continuation of it rather than something totally random and fun.
When you look at your career now, Chelsea, what does success mean to you?
Yeah, I think success first was kind of defined for me. Like there was this perception that you need to the only way to be successful, you need to hire people, you need to scale this way. You need to be an agency, all this stuff. And so now success for me looks a lot different. It looks like actually getting more and more in tune with what actually works for me. And so I think that's how I measure success now. Am I happy? And how do I create happiness in the moment? Not happiness as a goalpost that continuously moves, and not saying success will be when this happens, but how was I successful today? Like, how am I already successful from this perspective of success is out there? I'm reaching it, I'm running towards it, I'm trying to get to it, to I'm already successful. And I think that can be done even earlier than we think, because of course I'm saying that as somebody who's been in business for nearly 10 years. So it seems now thinking of my success that I was starting out. But I think there are successes to be found in everything we're doing. But really, what are the counterpoints? What are the proof that we've actually done that show that we shouldn't have this raging imposter syndrome, but we're doing great or we're doing our best? And I think that's all we can ask for.
Nice. I love that. Well, look, everybody, that about wraps it for this episode of Spotlight Sessions. We could talk all night, but I want to be respectful to my guest, Chelsie Tamms, who has just been an incredible wealth of knowledge and information. So thank you, Chelsie, for 10 years of business and joining us tonight to discuss your incredible career journey. Be sure to connect with Chelsie at letteringworks.com. That's letteringworks.com. If you guys love this program, catch all the latest updates for the next Spotlight Sessions and all the exciting content we have here in the Adobe Creative Career Discord by following the upcoming events calendar at the top of the server so you can see what is coming next. I also want to thank my show producer, Catherine Chu, Lisa Temple, live moderator, Elizabeth Mock, and the entire Adobe crew for sponsoring this program and helping to bring it alive. And thank you, Discord community, and everyone who listened to me, your host, Justin Bamforth. You can always catch me on Discord, LinkedIn, or my website, justinbamforth.com. Until next time, Chelsie, you do the honors.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
There it is. We'll see you next week. For more conversations with creative professionals, subscribe to the Spotlight Sessions podcast or check out the Adobe Creative Career Discord. Links are posted in the show notes.